From Transport Topics in Washington, D.C., this is RoadSigns. Here is your host, Seth Clevenger.
Thank you for listening to RoadSigns, the podcast series from Transport Topics that explores the trends and technologies that are shaping the future of trucking. In this episode, we're going to talk about the potential for 5G wireless communications in the freight transportation industry. This next-generation technology standard promises greater bandwidth, faster speeds, and improved reliability, all of which could help accelerate the expansion of onboard sensors and connected devices on commercial trucks and trailers. But this isn't going to happen overnight. It will take years for 5G coverage to expand to the point where it will become prevalent in transportation. So how long will it take for 5G to arrive in trucking? And how might it change fleet communications in the years ahead? We'll set out to answer those questions in this episode. To learn more about the future of 5G, we're going to speak with two trucking technology experts. Later in the program, we're going to bring in John Binder, Director of Wireless Operations for Trimble Transportation. But first, I'm excited to welcome Chris Wolfe, CEO of PowerFleet. Thanks for joining the program, Chris.
Hey, great to be here, Seth.
Great to have you on the podcast. I know there's a lot to talk about with the emergence of 5G wireless networks, especially in the consumer market, but I'm eager to hear your thoughts on what this is going to mean for the future of fleet tracking. So what do you think? How do you see 5G changing the freight transportation industry in the years ahead as 5G starts to come online?
I think it'll actually be revolutionary. I've been in the industry for over 30 years. I started out as a technologist, and the technology curve to me is just phenomenal right now. And it's not just 5G, but it's the confluence of about 5 technologies that will it'll put 5G on steroids. And those are like sensor technology, imaging technology, machine learning, and also the predictive analytics capabilities that are coming online.
There's a lot of hype about 5G, but what do you think is the timing in our industry? It's going to take some time for coverage to expand nationwide. When do you think it'll start to make sense for fleet operations?
If your products right now aren't 4G LTE or they don't have an LTE moniker, then you're probably in trouble. Because what's happening is the networks, at least the 2 major networks here in the States, have already decided about 18 to 24 months, I think, is the horizon to switch their 3G spectrum over to 5G. So if you think about if you have 10,000 trailers, if you have 8,000 trailers or 2,000 trailers, I don't think you want to wait till the last day to try and get those all upgraded. But if you do have LTE as a moniker, that standard is actually grandfathered in under the 5G spectrum. And the danger about 5G and the 3G, the role, just like 2G and 3G, is it's not going to go all at once, and it's not going to be ubiquitous at once. So you still need a product that can move to the next level, but stay at the current 3G level for a period of time.
So what's happening right now with the sunset that you described with 3G wireless networks? If you're a fleet operator with a bunch of 3G devices still out in the field, of course you need to move pretty quickly to have them replaced. But that's going to be replacing them with 4G devices right now, right? 4G LTE.
As long as it's 4G with the LTE, and because again that standard and that capability will run under the 5G network when it's up and running. So you're not going to lose anything. And that is actually getting you under the 5G umbrella if you're under LTE.
Okay, got it. And just how soon do you think 5G will become a real industry standard? I think we're moving into a phase now where 4G is very much the industry standard right now. But when do you think 5G will become prevalent enough that you would make that distinction?
Well, the first decision point customers and carriers have to make is, when do I need to start my migration? And literally, that's now. I mean, you don't need to do, throw it all out and move over. But if you're not planning and starting your upgrade process right now, you're already probably behind the 8 ball. But that being said, 5G will be phenomenally prevalent, I'd say 3 to 4 years out. So in the next 18 to 24 months, though, they've already started repurposing 3G spectrum in some places. So if you're 3G only right now, you might go dark. There's already places we've heard of in Wisconsin. We can see them near New York City. So again, it's because our systems, if you're in a trailer, a tractor, a chassis, or truck, that's a moving asset. And so you'll be in and out of coverage. And so when it gets in coverage, it all syncs back up. So we kind of hide the fact that, this one area was only, dark for a little while. But over time, that's just going to get, bigger and bigger black holes out there.
So there's definitely some real urgency at this stage if you're still operating with 3G tracking devices on your tractors and your trailers, it's probably past time to not only have a plan but to get moving on it.
And I would, and if I could add, I mean, because again, I used to develop these products. I used to work at Qualcomm and Omnitrax, and now here at PowerFleet, what we decided to do, and this was about 3 years ago, we re-engineered all of our tracking products to not be tracking products. Because if you look at what 5G can enable with all the sensor technology I mentioned, the imaging technology, you really need to come at it with a platform approach. So instead of replacing a tracking unit with a tracking unit, why not replace it with a platform that you can like Legos you can add on to later? Oh, I want a weight sensor. Oh, I want a cargo camera, etc. If you just go with a tracking unit, that's all you're going to have, and you're going to miss out on all the capability.
And speaking of that, I mean, you alluded to this earlier as well. We've really seen, this concept of the Internet of Things, really has expanded, throughout our society, but very much in the transportation industry as well. Much more than, sort of the basic, where's my trailer approach of the past to now, cargo sensors, when is the door opening, what are the conditions inside the trailer, maybe even tracking the cargo. So just more and more sensors, just more and more information. So where do you see this all going? What do you think is next for IoT and trucking, and what kinds of new sensors might we see in the future as we continue to see the technology evolve?
Yeah, that's a great question. This is kind of where I see 5G. If you think about like the human body, 5G to me is the nervous system. It is actually the transport layer that just enables sensor data, whether it be imaging from your eyeballs, hearing, smell, touch, which are other the sensors, whether it's humidity, temperature. Those sensors all have to feed back using a high-speed network with low latency. And what do you have to have at the end of that? You have to have machine learning. You're going to have so much data overload that unless you are sorting through, because you're going to get not just your data, we're actually building our platforms to gather what we call collateral data. And what does that mean? That means your cell phone or your tracking unit, it's talking to every other tracking unit, right? You pull up your cell phone and look at the Bluetooth MAC addresses, or your computer, and you'll see all the Wi-Fi addresses. Those are all things that are near you. Well, that's could be very important if you're trying to recreate an accident, if you're trying to recreate a theft incident. So what we do is we have built our systems to bring all that collateral data, and that collateral data has to go through machine learning algorithms to find out what's applicable and what's noise. And again, I think that avalanche of data, if you haven't architected your systems correctly, you're not going to really be able to sift through that and get meaningful information.
Certainly. I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. And I hear this from multiple, fleet executives whose companies are kind of on the leading edge of technology. They'll say that the challenge is, less about acquiring the data and more about interpreting the data and really digesting it and making it actionable, so you can really drive business decisions and improve your operations.
Yeah, I would almost challenge everybody out there. I've been developing systems as systems architect for years, and I always ask my engineers, the so what question. So what? You get a lot of information back. You have a great report. It shows you some anomalies. So what? In other words, everything should be actionable. Why present something to somebody without giving them 3 things they can do to fix it, to make it better, to improve it, or maybe institutionalize it? So again, I think you're going to see that the architectures and the technology and the capability we have today will allow more actionable data. Before it was all like after the fact reporting, and then it was it was all, hey, I'll change my processes, but I'm only looking at historical data. Now it's got to be real time and real time reactionary.
In times like these, it's crucial to stay informed. Transport Topics is offering all the information you need to make business decisions in these unprecedented times. And in the wake of the many event cancellations and group gatherings, TT ensures a virtual way to consume business content and conversation. To join the conversation and stay ahead of the news, follow Transport Topics on all social outlets or by visiting ttn.ws/stay informed.
Shifting gears a little bit, I also want to take a moment to talk about this very unusual moment that we're all in with the coronavirus pandemic. Of course, this has put a lot of financial strain on certain segments of the trucking industry. But at the same time, I think it's also shined the spotlight on really the need for good technology and IT systems to manage this kind of disruption and volatility that we've seen in the freight market. So I want to get your take on this. How do you think the pandemic is going to affect technology investment in our industry moving forward?
That's a great question. I think the companies right now that see the problem, and the problem is really a lack of flexibility because our supply chains, depending on what you're in, if you're in heavy manufacturing and not essentials, I mean, it basically went dead. If you were in food and grocery distribution, it was on fire. But if you were in the bulk side of that, which is like restaurants, sporting events, and amusement parks, that actually died as well. And then you look at, in the automotive side, just another add-on to that is all the rental cars, right? Now, companies are lost 80% of their business, right? So they're selling cars, which now that's going to put price pressure on cars. So even though you might restart the car manufacturers now, the price of cars, it's like, why buy a new car if you can go buy a used one at a phenomenally reduced rate? But all that being said, is I think we need to have a lot more flexibility in our system. We need to be able to move pieces, parts of our logistics chain, and that means customers working with competitors, even so different carriers. At like, why can't we reposition fleets that were doing certain types of non-essential hauling and repurpose them to take care of some of these bottlenecks that we had in the food and grocery distribution side? I actually believe, one thing that's going to come out of this is one thing the whole government needs to step up and do is like a strategic food reserve, like we have a strategic petroleum reserve. But at the same time, have the flexibility, like through FEMA or somebody, to say, hey, look, we have to have trucks and operations and whatever down in this area. We have to have pop up meat processing plants. Instead of these, mammoth ones that do 10% of the U.S. food supply. So I think as a country and as specifically as a logistics organization and associations, we need to really figure out how we can be a lot more flexible and also have a lot more surge potential in certain areas. And technology can help with all that because visibility of where the assets are and what their status is. I mean, if you think about it, it all comes back to demand and capacity matching, right?
Certainly, and I do think that a lot of people in government, federal, state, local levels, all realize just how important the supply chain is as they went through this pandemic, and just making sure that rest stops and drivers had access to food, things like that. But of course, on the fleet side as well, there's a tremendous need to be able to really manage your operations carefully at a time like this. But the flip side, of course, is some of those hard hit sectors of the industry. There are companies that saw the revenue really take a big hit. Do you think that these companies are going to just going to have to tighten their belts and they'll have to pull back on tech investment, or do you think it's just going to be a prerequisite moving forward? You have to find a way to have the technology tools you need to run your business.
I think it's going to be lumpy. I do see, the companies that had, good balance sheets and had a cash stash, they'll invest and they know they need to, right? So we see that ourselves, the companies that are buying technology. And historically, during a typical downturn, a lot of trucking logistics companies, I actually come from the industry. I used to work at Roadway and Penske Logistics. We would actually look to buy because it's an opportune time to implement. Right. We were just talking about the 3G to 5G migration. It's hey, if you have trailers on the fence, it's a great time to go out, and if you have the money, and get all that work done and do it at a lower cost, and all your equipment's available, right? Because you can actually do the installations all at one time. So some companies are doing that. Other companies, though, are more cash strapped, and so they're gonna be at a competitive disadvantage because it's going to take them a while to do that investment.
Now, I also want to talk about the latest developments at your company at PowerFleet. The company, of course, was previously known as ID Systems, but has been around for many years. That being said, PowerFleet is still a relatively new brand in our industry, but Chris, if you could just take us through, the changes at your company and where you're heading, would be very helpful.
No, I appreciate the opportunity. 3.5 years ago, just a little bit on my background, I actually ran OmniTrax for 5 years. I was with Qualcomm for quite a period of time. And before that, I was in the industry, as I mentioned. That being said, as I joined PowerFleet about 3.5 years ago, and the company was struggling at the time, it was called ID Systems, and our primary claim to fame was forklift telematics. So basically, making sure you're doing your OSHA checklists, you had access control, and you knew about impacts and safety, and also utilization. And by the way, we're one of the largest players in the world in that space. We also had trailer tracking and chassis tracking at the time, but to be honest with you, the products were a little long in the tooth, and so we set out and spent a lot of money over the last 3 years developing these platforms I talked about earlier, which are all 4G, LTE, 5G migration capable. But they're also Bluetooth capable and enabled. They have multiple power options. So what we wanted to do is, again, build this ecosystem of technology. And we also have what I call bumper to bumper to dock. So we have an in-cab product with ELDHOS. We have a refrigerated product with two-way command and control. We have we have 3 different trailer tracking products depending on what your use cases are. One, and we're very proud of this, is solar paneled with super cap technology. We're the only one in the industry with it. That unit will last over 15 years in the field. We're the first ones to come out with digital camera technology for detecting load capacity, how it's loaded. And we use machine learning on that to actually help people know how to unload freight, know if the load shifted in transit, know if it was loaded correctly even before you come pick it up, and let the driver look to make sure if he's supposed to pick up an empty trailer, guess what? Is it really empty? Maybe they stuffed it full of cardboard. And I do think our products were also engineered to enable the velocity into and out of the yard. So it's like, get the trailer loaded, minimize the driver's time waiting to get into the yard, get to the right trailer, make sure it's in the right status, make sure it doesn't have any issues with it, and help him get out of the yard as fast as possible so he can make more money.
Before I let you go, Chris, I also want to get your thoughts, longer term about, the future of technology in the transportation industry. There's so much happening with IoT, like we talked about. Of course, artificial intelligence and machine learning are going to be part of the path forward. We're seeing a lot of development in terms of business process automation in the back office. We also see automated and electric vehicles coming into our industry. Uh, what do you see as the most transformative trends that will shape the future of our industry?
I think what COVID showed us, and what we've been talking about in a way, is the more visibility you have, the more you can recognize choke points and bottlenecks. And like what we saw in the COVID thing, we solve what the problems in our supply chain. So how do you fix them? If you need capacity, where is it? So that's all fixed with visibility. You have to know where your assets are. You have to, and not just assets, where the freight is. I do think there's going to be multiple layers of value propositions here. The cargo itself will become self-aware. The cost curve is getting down to the point where, it used to be you do data recorders on pharmaceuticals, right? And it was very expensive, and after the fact reporting, et cetera. We have a product right now for $20 on a pallet. By the way, it's reusable. So for every shipment of 26 pallets in a 53-foot trailer, depending on what the commodities are, I can tell you the temp, the vibe, the shock, everything about that one pallet in a 53-foot trailer. So if very high value goods, obviously, will be the first ones to move that way. Then it'll be like goods that that have a short shelf life, and you need to know that they get there in the right, like with the right humidity and temp. There was no over temp or over shock. But again, you're going to see some shippers and consignees are going to say, hey, I demand that. I want that on every shipment. You're going to say the trailers and the tractors and the drivers, the trucking companies obviously still need to have real-time information and all that sensor information so that they have flexibility and they can react faster to operational scenarios.
Well, this will all be fascinating to watch in the years ahead, but I think that's a good place to leave it. So thanks again, Chris, for joining the program and sharing all your thoughts.
Appreciate it, Seth. Have a good day.
Did you know you can ask Alexa to open Transport Topics? In just 1 minute, you will hear the biggest trucking headlines of that day. Be prepared and start your morning off right with Transport Topics.
Next on Road Signs, we're excited to welcome John Bender, Director of Wireless Operations for Trimble Transportation. Thanks for joining the program, John.
Thank you for having us. Always exciting to talk about technology and the way it affects transportation.
So there's a lot of interest and excitement about 5G networks, of course, in the consumer market, but I'd like to talk to you about what this next generation of wireless technology will mean for trucking. Of course, in recent years, we've seen really an expansion of the Internet of Things in transportation. Of course, Trimble's part of that with telematics, and there's been many more devices and sensors on modern trucks and trailers over the years. What will 5G mean for those types of sensors that the industry has adopted and have become increasingly commonplace? What's the next step there? I mean, are we just talking about more reliability? Just more data? How will this play out?
Well, so a couple things. One, we move the massive throughput that we have. Think about gigabyte throughput and what that means for virtually instant communications back to the vehicle, particularly in a safety mode. If you think of devices, trucks communicating to each other as they move down the road, communicating road conditions, traffic conditions. It's really the efficiency that gets enabled. So, no longer a worry about throughput, right? Does the network have capacity because of the massive capacity that 5G enables? And it's a much more efficient network for the operators to use as well. If you look at the bandwidth required for a 2G, a 3G, or a 4G connection, you then understand why carriers are sunsetting those earlier technologies because they are bandwidth hogs in some way compared to the throughput we get with 5G. So that virtually instant communication, the ability to know the status of a vehicle at all times, the ability of safety applications to react in millisecond delays and make instant decisions that could affect life and the safety of the driver and of course the equipment itself. All of that is enabled with 5G. Again, it's not to say that 4G doesn't get us close there, but 5G really delivers on the promise of virtually instant communications anywhere, and fully enabled with really no delay in communications either.
And of course, it's going to take some time for 5G coverage to expand across the country. Especially think about trucking. There's so many open spaces in the country on the interstates. When do you think it'll reach a point where it'll make sense for fleet operations? How long will it take for 5G to really make sense in our industry?
So a great question, and one that we hear from fleets all the time. As we've moved through technology change over the last 20 years or so with Trimble. So we expect to see the availability of the network and then the hardware along with standards likely in the start of 2022. So there's really several phases. One, the carriers acquire the bandwidth they need for new networks. We continue to see the government enable new bandwidth to support the services that are there. They're also sunsetting previous technologies so that they can use that bandwidth for new technologies. Then there's a hardware layer as well. And that is once the carriers decide on their standards and how they want to use the bandwidth and technology that's out there, then they work with the vendors, the modem manufacturers to make sure that that equipment is compliant. Then they begin the build out of coverage. And coverage, as you see announcements of the various carriers and their 5G, they're typically telling you what cities have been enabled, right? It's not the lanes of traffic between that are enabled with 5G at the moment, but the metropolitan areas, because they're really focusing in this initial phase on the consumer side. So, we often say within Trimble that coverage is king. We can have great applications and partners and integrations, but if their device, the truck, is not able to communicate in a certain location, well, then that's all for naught. So, it's really those four layers: the carriers deciding on a standard, then the availability of the modem hardware, the interoperability, meaning that carrier B, Verizon can use AT&T's network, AT&T can use T-Mobile Sprint, and then communicate with operators around the world. So those standards are being put in place as well. And then, of course, once all those standards and hardware is in place, then the build out of the networks. And again, we expect that moment to be in early 2022.
And as we start to look ahead to 5G, of course, there's also a much more immediate wireless technology transition that we're going through right now with the looming sunset of 3G networks that you referenced earlier. So where is Trimble in that process right now? And what's your advice to fleets that are still either going through or just need to make plans to get onto 4G and make that transition as smooth as possible?
Yeah, so I would encourage folks to lean in initially from a planning perspective, right? I'll just back up a bit. We at Trimble, we launched our 4G product 4.5 years ago now. We were trying to lean in, right? There's always kind of a bleeding edge there, but in this case, development and working with the carriers on when networks are available is critical on the front end. And so we've communicate regularly with our customers on the status of the network. We hold seminars, webinars, much like we're talking about today, to let them know when that jumping off point. But the whole idea there is so that they can plan from a CapEx perspective, right? If I went to an operator, a carrier of ours today, and said, "Hey, we expect 5G in early 2022. Here's our roadmap." It's not. I think generally from the operator side, the carrier side, they're looking at perhaps 3 years from a CapEx budget. So it's about getting the news out there early so that they can plan, and also tie that in with their truck replacement schedule as well, right? So that they're syncing those together. Now, there will be a transition, of course, between those. And what we've seen in the past is as networks sunset, we've generally seen about a 10-year availability of previous technologies. And now that 4G LTE is so ubiquitous and the coverage is there, we expect that network to last to at least 2030. And there are other estimates out there to 2035, right? So LTE coexists, let's say it this way, 4G coexists with 5G in the same way that previous technologies, 2 and 3G, have coexisted with 4G. You look at what the networks are capable of and what they enable, and there are, multiple extremes. There are applications that require 5G and other applications that are not as time sensitive that can operate on a previous network, and hardware that combines 2G, 3G, 4, and perhaps 5G technology into a single chip really guarantee a long-lived hardware plan. Also within Trimble, we've recently introduced a hardware as a service. So, we're bundling the hardware into the service that's required to support it, and the applications as well, so that we don't have that large CapEx expense up front. That should also help our customers that perhaps don't have the larger budgets or don't have the staff to do this extended planning to be able to jump right in to a new technology in a bundled way.
Now, I'd be remiss if I didn't also ask you about how the coronavirus pandemic has, affected the trucking technology sector. Of course, this has had a huge impact on, the not only the transportation industry but society at large. So I'm just curious what you're seeing out there. I mean, have you found that fleets are starting to tighten their belts given the economic uncertainty, or on the flip side, are you hearing that the pandemic has actually highlighted the importance of telematics and just good IT systems and technology to?
So I think it's both sides, but it really highlights the enablement, right? The efficiencies that are in place with a telematics solution, a provider. We recently acquired an organization called Cubics, so that we really have end-to-end freight visibility. And again, it's about the efficiency. So even before COVID, I would say that was the primary reason to adopt a telematics solution, right? In the sense that there are very small margins in the business, the ability to squeeze out even the most basic things like extra miles per gallon and tracking there, but then also the driver efficiency as well. So as traffic has ramped up initially during the early part of COVID and perhaps has leveled out a bit. Again, it's that load matching, it's the enablement of the efficiencies of telematics. I think that has really pointed out that COVID has really made even more important, right? The fewer drivers, perhaps, better load matching, looking at the safety, of course, along the path. As there's been some lifting of some requirements, allowing drivers to spend more time on the road, and the safety aspect that the telematics enables as well, I think has made this industry more important to trucking. Again, I would say the efficiency and the operational efficiencies as well that we have access to is probably the most important. Just from a back office or a work perspective within Trimble, we're kind of well set up to manage this in support of our customers before this happened. So not much change there other than some folks in quality and development and fulfillment. But otherwise, we have not really missed a beat. And in communicating with our customers, it seems to be the case there as well. Looking for more efficiency, particularly as margins might get squeezed or loads, could be variable.
So, unfortunately, one of the side effects of the pandemic, of course, is what we've seen. Lots of industry conferences, in-person events have gone to remote, virtual only, and that's been the case for Trimble's Insight User Conference, which is coming up. Of course, I was looking forward to seeing you all in Orlando, but I'll be sure to tune in for the virtual meeting in August. So, I'm curious, just how much of a challenge has it been for your company and your customers to adapt to working remotely, especially in the back office environment and in the conference settings. How have you managed to kind of find your way through this really strange and challenging time?
Yep. So again, we hold a lot of business reviews with our customers. Those were generally handled in-house, right? There was nothing more important than that line of sight, right, to your customer across the table and engaging with them. But our move to those business reviews has been virtual, and that has really not missed a step. Although your a great comment on our Insight conference, this will be new territory for us as well. So we've moved it entirely to a digital format or a virtual format. Actually, I'll be hosting a session on much the same conversation we're having here today about technology change and transition to new platforms during that event. So perhaps you could listen in on that. We're in the early stages of registration and such there, but so far the response has been strong. And I think folks are looking forward to gaining as much knowledge as they can in a virtual sense. We're also looking to set up some really kind of virtual chat rooms. Sometimes at a conference, the conversation as you leave a particular session might be some of the most important or information gathering you get. Those side questions, and so we're going to enable some side chat rooms so that hallway chat can continue, if you will, outside of in a virtual way.
Well, I look forward to seeing it and tuning in remotely. But before I let you go, John, I also want to get your kind of overall thoughts on the future of technology in the transportation industry. It's a very broad question and also a crystal ball question. But just what are your overall thoughts on how do you think this industry might be different 10 years from now?
Again, I think it points to the 5G and what's enabled, and I think you'll see much more virtual driving. Of course, not necessarily a big surprise there. things even as basic as the platooning that we talk about today, where vehicles are traveling together. I think there'll be more enablement of safety issues along the way, and of course, electric trucks will play a big role there. We've as we've moved to natural gas vehicles and now electric, that means some changes for the way we interact with the vehicles. So that will continue. But again, I think there's more of a virtual world from a trucking perspective. I mentioned things you could do even today with an autonomous yard, if you will. I think you'll see more of that. That doesn't mean the driver is still not present in the vehicle. And of course, a very important part of not only getting the goods delivered, but that interaction with their end customers and presenting kind of the face of the business there. But again, I think the primary look 10 years ahead will be much more virtual, augmented reality as it relates to getting goods delivered in a safe way, while still, promoting the efficiencies that the technology will enable from, miles per gallon or miles per kilowatt, if you will, along the way, and that enablement. So far, there's no conversation about 6G, right? But there could also be a development along the way. Although I think what we've gotten to with 5G is really kind of the best of the generations before it. There used to be more competing technologies. It was CDMA, GSM, HSPA, multiple technologies. But as the carriers have realized the need for a global footprint, which is where Trimble's highly engaged there. They're more willing to work together on networks and technology, and so the estimates for 5G longevity are out to 2040 and beyond. That doesn't mean there aren't some iterations along the way, but I think the technology that we see with 5G will relatively stay in place from a technology perspective and the cellular carrier's back office. But on the transportation side, I think you'll see an increase in the autonomous driving, virtual reality, and using drivers where it's most important, and using technology and efficiency where the driver is not necessarily needed.
Got it. Well, I think that's a good stopping point, John. Thanks again for joining the podcast and sharing your insights with us.
Transport topics in one word: authoritative.
Knowledge.
Outstanding.
Reliable.
We asked Transport Topics readers to describe us in one word.
Informative.
Informative.
Integrity.
The Bible.
Authoritative.
The authority.
Transportation information, that's two, but I gotta have it both.
Physically large. Oh, that's 2 words.
Visit influence.ttnews.com/say hello to find out what they're talking about.
Before we close, let's take a moment to revisit our original questions. When will 5G wireless technology arrive in trucking? And how might it change fleet communications in the future? As we've heard from our guests, 5G holds a great deal of promise for the transportation industry, but it's probably going to take a few more years for it to become commonplace in fleet operations. In the meantime, though, trucking companies need to complete the transition to the current standard, 4G LTE. Wireless carriers are in the process of sunsetting their 3G networks, so any fleets that are still relying on 3G devices on their trucks and trailers will need to replace them soon. And for companies that have already migrated to 4G LTE, it's not too early to start thinking about what 5G may bring to their operations in the future. Over time, the expansion of the Internet of Things has transformed fleet management. Modern trucking companies aren't merely tracking the location of their assets, they're collecting data on everything from tire pressure to cargo status. And the emergence of 5G will enable the next phase of that evolution. In the future, you can expect to see more sophisticated sensors, deeper data analytics, and above all, more actionable insights about your fleet operations. If you've enjoyed this episode of RoadSigns, please let others know. Rate and review us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. If my questions have sparked questions of your own, share them with me and the RoadSigns team. You can email us at share@ttnews.com. We'll read them and respond daily. And of course, we'll be back in 2 weeks with a fresh episode of RoadSigns. Until then, I'm Seth Clevenger. Thank you for listening.